Today on CityCast Madison. We've got a new neighbor, someone you may already know, or at the very least, you've seen his work. He was there on President Barack Obama's first day on the job to his final hours in office. White House photographer Pete Souza documented historic moments, both large and small. From iconic photos of Obama in the Situation Room to the little boy reaching up to touch Obama's hair. Yeah, that was him. Souza moved to Madison shortly after his tenure at the White House and still calls our city home. So we had to ask him what it was like being President Obama's shadow and get some pro tips on photography. It's Wednesday, June 28th. I'm Bianca Martin, and here's what Madison's talking about. Pete, hello.
How's it going?
It's going super, super well. I understand you moved to Madison to be near family, but did anything else draw you here?
Well, my wife liked Madison. She grew up in Ann Arbor, and when our daughter was doing her residency here, she visited, this is during the Obama administration, she visited her several times and kind of fell in love with the city. So when she retired from teaching and I had left the White House, she said, let's move to Madison. And I said, okay.
So what's it like being outside of the Oval Office's immediate orbit, that DC 24/7 buzz?
I can't say that I miss it. I mean, the job itself was so all-encompassing, both physically and mentally. It's just nice to be away. I think if I had stayed in DC, I'd probably, sort of miss the White House more.
Sure.
But being far removed is sort of a nice thing. You don't feel that you have to keep up with every little thing that's going on.
Well, man, I mean, you did your job. You have this amazing photo archive for President Obama and, loads of photos for President Reagan. But I want to know, how did you see your role? It's such a unique position to be in. Was it to capture history, painting a certain narrative for the president? Like, what was your role?
Yeah, I always viewed my role first and foremost as documenting for history. That I was, the eyes for history in terms of showing what his presidency was like, what he was like as a human being. Every single picture that I shot for both administrations is now at the National Archives. That's the primary purpose of creating this visual record of a presidency, is these are images that eventually all will be in the public domain, and for future generations, important in terms of research and looking back and getting maybe a better idea of what not only his presidency was like, but what, as I said, what he was like as a human being. And, think about if we had had that kind of a visual record of, Abraham Lincoln's administration. That was when photography was first starting out, and there isn't that kind of a visual record of his presidency. We have to conjure things up in our imagination. So I always thought about not, just 50 years hence with my photographs, but I was thinking, 500 years, like hopefully we'll still be around as a democracy.
Yes.
In 500 years. And, and if we are, people will actually be able to go back and look at all the pictures that I shot.
You said all of the photos will be in the National Archive. So that means, some of them, were not released to the public. I'm assuming sensitive moments, that sort of thing.
1.9 million photos in 8 years. And
1.9 million.
And in terms of what we made public, it was, for the White House website, as Instagram came along in the middle of his first term. We had a Flickr photo stream, which back in the early 2000s was kind of the way of sharing photos. All those photos, because they were made public during the administration, are immediately in the public domain. Whereas the other ones, we've now passed a 5-year mark when he has left office. This is getting in the weeds a little bit, but we've now passed a 5-year mark, which means that someone can FOIA, file a Freedom of Information Act request for any photo. I mean, the Washington Post did this exact thing with all the photos that I shot the day of the bin Laden raid. And the National Archives released, I don't know, 500 or 800 pictures to them. Eventually, they'll all be out there for public consumption.
But, you mentioned the Osama bin Laden raid. You were there, these tense shots from the Situation Room, key moments, international conflicts. And they're, now famous photographs. But there are some other ones that are just as iconic, that are just the everyday. Like, I'm thinking about the little boy touching Barack Obama's hair. And I feel like those were almost just as critical. What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, those are my favorite photographs, not necessarily the historic photographs. I mean, obviously, the Situation Room photograph during the bin Laden raid is historic in a sense. It's like it's not the picture that I have hanging in my house.
Sure.
I am more, I gravitate more towards those moments just of everyday life. I mean, you mentioned the picture of young Jacob Philadelphia touching his head. Certainly that photograph is one of my favorites probably. And I just think it reveals so much about him as a human being, Barack Obama as a human being, that he'd, go ahead and bend over and let this little kid touch his head like that. So yeah, for sure, for me, the everyday non-historic moments were the ones that I gravitated towards. And, and quite frankly, it's the kind of photographs I've done throughout my career, not necessarily with presidents, but just trying to capture moments of everyday life of normal, American citizens, or oftentimes world citizens. So certainly I would agree with your sentiment.
Yeah, I mean, I hear the saying the personal is political a lot. Does that resonate?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you see a photograph like that, you know a couple things. One, that it's an authentic photograph. I mean, you can't stage a photograph like that. And it's, if you look at it from a photographic standpoint, the composition maybe is not that great, but I did get the precise moment, and it's just such a human moment. And I think that you can't fake that. I mean, I think it shows his true character. If anything, I hope people come away looking at my pictures to see the humanity and what Barack Obama was like as a person.
What was he like? Not that I'm dying to know, because I am.
He is what my pictures show. I mean, he's I think the one advantage I had in photographing him is I had known him for 4 years before he became president. I wasn't friends with him, but I had a professional relationship with him, having worked at the Chicago Tribune and spent a lot of time with him when he was the U.S. Senator, traveled with him to 5 countries for the Tribune. So I got to know him professionally. And I think that, there's a certain comfort on both sides in terms of when you're in somebody's personal space like I was with him very often, you sort of got to have some sort of a relationship with the person that you're photographing. And I think that was invaluable to me, when he was elected president, in that I wasn't overwhelmed by, oh my God, it's Barack Obama, the president of the United States. It was somebody that I had known for 4 years. So I was very comfortable being in his presence, which I think made it easier for me to concentrate on, my job is to, document everything he's doing, photograph everything he's doing, and not get caught up in maybe being a little overwhelmed at being in the Oval Office of the Situation Room.
Sure. Well, and you'd been there before as well.
Yeah, I've been there before, and I think that also was a helpful experience. I was very young at the time. I wasn't the chief photographer, but, I found myself in situations with President Reagan, which were quite tense and intimate on different occasions. And so you learn to navigate in those situations. And then, following the Reagan stint, I had 20 years, both as a freelance photographer and then working for the Chicago Tribune, having experiences all around the world in photographing many different events and subjects and wars. And I like to say the people when I started in the Obama administration, I was a seasoned photojournalist as a background. So
Absolutely. I'm thinking about, did you call him Barry?
no, you don't.
There are certain lines.
Yeah. I mean, even to this day, he is either, actually I kind of called him POTUS because like Mr. President seems like a little too much to get out sometimes. So either POTUS or Sir, which I still refer to him even when I talk to him that way. I do call Michelle now, but I don't call him Barack.
You're an expert photographer, and a lot of people want to be photographers today, especially with Instagram and that sort of thing. And people think, well, how do I get good?
Yeah, and I think that I heard an interview on NPR one time with an author, and the interviewer asked the usual question, which was, what advice do you have for aspiring, authors? And this person replied, write one page every day. So if you take photography and apply that wisdom to photography, it's get out every day and make pictures. I mean, Henri Cartier-Bresson, the famous French photographer who is known for the decisive moment, capturing the decisive moment, mostly a street photographer, meaning he would just take, not random, but pictures on the street, unplanned, unstaged. He once said that his worst pictures were his first 10,000. And I think there's something to be said for that. I think that's where experience and learning and making mistakes and growing, evaluating your work, having somebody other than your parents or your roommate, look at your work, but somebody who's going to give it honest critiques, looking at what other photographers are doing, not necessarily to copy them, but to try to understand how they approach, their subjects. It's a constant learning process. I'm still, learning. I feel I don't know everything. And so, I mean, there's always a search for trying to create a good photograph that's different than what you did 2 weeks ago or 2 years ago or 20 years ago.
Authors say, right, photographers take photos. And also now people have these smartphones, right? These like kind of fancy cameras in their hand. Do you think that people have an excuse? Can they get out there and take really quality photographs today?
Oh, you mean like with a smartphone?
Yeah.
I mean, yes and no. There are certain limitations. I have an iPhone. I shoot photos on my iPhone. It's good for some things. It's not a professional camera. So, it's fine for doing selfies and pictures of your dog and your kids and stuff like that. But, it has certain limitations. You could still take a bad picture with an iPhone. and, a lot of it is having a better sense of framing and composition. And so many people only shoot vertical with their phone, which
is a no-no.
I wouldn't say it's a no-no, but I think that you can turn the camera horizontal and make a horizontal picture, so don't limit yourself to vertical. I also think that there's a tendency for people with a smartphone to shoot every photo from the same angle, whatever height they are. They never think of like getting down on their knees or getting up high a little bit. Sometimes the angle you're shooting from can make a okay photograph, a good photograph. So little things like that.
I've seen you posted pictures out here, like around wildlife. What's your life like here with photojournalism or photography?
Yeah, I'm not out every day photographing. I'm actually been trying to organize my pre-White House archive. So that's taken most of my time and doing various things. I have 2 granddaughters now, so I spend a lot of time with them. But yeah, I occasionally get out and photograph. I went out the other day with Kenton Fowler, a local Madison photographer, and we were photographing the blue herons there in the Arboretum.
I saw that. That was beautiful. It's like a family.
Yeah. I have covered a few, like during the George Floyd protests, I went out and photographed some of those protests. Just the result of the election, when Roe v. Wade was overturned, there was a protest rally at the Capitol. I went and photographed that. I spent a few days with Mandela Barnes during the Senate campaign, just like on my own, not for a publication. So I'm trying to do, things every now and then, but it's not something I'm doing like 100% of the time.
Sure. You got to chill some.
Well, chill. And, I am out of town a fair amount. And so I'm not always in town when things are going on. Sometimes I get out there to photograph either wildlife or my peonies growing in the front yard, or I like photography. So I try to get out there as often as I can to photograph, but it's not every day.
Do you think there are any like iconic spots in Madison to shoot, like when you do get out?
Well, in terms of democracy, just go up to the Capitol. It seems like anytime there's something going on, that's a kind of a gathering place for people to express their view. And I live near the Capitol, so it's easy for me to just walk up there. And then, I think I've probably spent more time in the Arboretum than any other place. It's not that far away, and if there's a big snowstorm, I usually end up driving to the Arboretum because it's so beautiful in the snow. So I probably the Arboretum's not my number one go-to place. And I photograph sandhill cranes there. My wife is a fanatic of sandhill cranes, so I was kind of photographing them basically for her in many ways.
Good place to be. Oh, I love it. Well, it sounds like I was just going to ask you, it sounds like you do a lot for and with your wife. That's absolutely lovely. I mean, do you like Madison so far? We know she likes it.
I like Madison. I don't like the winters, but what are you going to do, right?
That's true.
So we tried to get away for a couple weeks the last 2 winters, just for a break, from the weather.
Yeah. So it sounds like you like the Arboretum. Do you have any other favorite spots so far?
In terms of photographing, the lakes, of course. I don't know. I think I probably spent more time at the Capitol or the Arboretum than any other place in terms of photographing.
Yeah.
The Capitol for, as I said, for rallies and protests. And there just seems to always be something going on there. And then the Arboretum just for the beauty.
Well, Pete, I hope you stay our neighbor. It's been an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing a bit about your journey as well as some great photography tips.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
It's Pete Souza, chief White House photographer under the Obama administration and now a Madison resident. Speaking of the best of things, the deadline to cast your ballot in the Best of Madison competition is this Friday, June 30th. CityCast has been nominated in the Best Local Podcast category, and if we earned it, we'd love your vote. See our show notes for a link. And here's what else Madison's talking about. Learn more about photography. There are still a few spots left in a beginner's class hosted by the Madison Photography Group. The class is at the Monona Terrace on Saturday morning, July 1st. You do need a real camera, but professional instructors will be there to show you tricks to make sense of all those camera settings, so you can up your photography game. You also will need to reserve a spot ahead of time. We'll toss details in our show notes. And if you're a history buff, there's an event for you this Saturday. The Madison Trust for Historic Preservation is hosting a walking tour of the Mansion Hill, once the go-to neighborhood for Madison bigwigs. You'll learn about the architectural styles of the area and hear the stories of the familiar family names that once called Mansion Hill home. This walking tour starts at the Plaza Tavern on July 1st, and you need to register in advance. Details again will be in our show notes. That's all for today here on CityCast Madison. I'm Bianca Martin. If you enjoyed the show, why not share this podcast with someone who catches the sunrise every morning? We'll be back tomorrow morning with more stories from around the city. Talk soon.